Hello, friends. Tonight's guest requires no introduction to fans of the Granada Sherlock Holmes series. Miss June Wyndham Davies was producer and showrunner on the program, beginning with The Return in 1986 and ending with The Memoirs in 1994. In addition to shepherding an incredible 22 stories of Sherlock Holmes from page to screen, she also famously produced the internationally acclaimed series Crib, as well as Shades of Darkness for Granada Television, and she received a BAFTA for producing the 1997 film August, which starred and was directed by Anthony Hopkins. June was also a dear friend to both Edward Hardwicke and Jeremy Brett, and she was recently kind enough to share with us a number of recollections from her time on the series. And so, without further ado, we give you June Wyndham Davies. Well, June, we are so completely thrilled to speak with you today. I mean, you're responsible for one of the most special things that we believe has ever been put on television, so it's just so nice to be with you today.
Oh, gosh. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to diverge too far from Sherlock Holmes, but I kind of would really like to know just a little bit about you. I mean, where did you grow up?
Oh, I grew up in Cardiff in South Wales. I had always wanted to be an actress, and the theatre came from my grandmother, who took me every Wednesday matinee to Cardiff Prince of Wales Theatre, and I just became in love with the theatre.
Ah.
I think you do know my age, don't you?
Yeah.
I'm 94, yeah. But the thing is, I was 17 then, and I went to London. I went to the Preparatory Academy for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and it was just at the end of the war, of the Second World War. And so all the actors that had been in the Army and Navy and Air Force, etc., were all coming back, and they were all getting the proper priority positions that they should have in the academy. And there was this thing called the Preparatory Academy for young people like us, me and Dorothy Tewton and people like that.
Ah.
And I was there for 2 years. From then, I got a job at Bristol Rep. And from then on, I was really an actress until I met Arthur Bruff, and we had a conversation. He particularly wanted me to do some direction, and I said I would love to. And then I started directing the theatre, and from the theatre I went to the BBC and was trained by them.
Very nice.
When I was at Horsham, Theatre Royal Horsham, which I ran in conjunction with a man called Alwyn Fox, we engaged for the very first time ever seen on stage Michael Caine. Yeah, well, he wasn't Michael Caine then. He was Maurice Micklewhite. And anyway, that's just a little by the way.
Yeah. I'm curious, what kind of work did your parents do?
Well, in those days, your mother didn't do anything. You know, she looked after everything. And I'll tell you a terrible story about my father. On leaving Cardiff University, he was to take a job at a very good firm called Benson's, where he was to eventually become a director of the firm. It had all been fixed. Everything had been fixed. And my father was a very good ballroom dancer. And unfortunately, he chose the lift girl from a big shop called Morgan's in Cardiff to enter a competition with, and they won, and he was on the front page, and Benson's refused to take him. Absolutely refused to take him. So they were very awful in those days, you know. And anyway.
It was a different time, yeah.
Very, very different times, and he tried a number of things. And eventually my mother said, listen, there's a job going for an under-manager in Woolworths. Why don't you try that? And that's what he did. Yeah. And eventually he became a superintendent for Woolworths. And he started off by having the opportunity of a marvelous career, and he ruined it, I'm afraid, by excessive ballroom dancing.
There's so much we could discuss today. I mean, I personally could talk to you for hours about Shades of Darkness, And maybe we'll come back to that. But
oh, Shades of Darkness, how lovely.
well, I mean, what a wonderful show. How did that come about? Was that a passion project for you?
It was because I have always been so very interested in ghosts and ghost stories and things like that. And I began to realize that what I could do is I could get together a series in which we had absolutely number one writers and cast them very, very well. And that became Shades of Darkness, yeah.
I'm not sure how many years it ran, but it was basically one season. Was that correct?
Oh yes, well, just one season, a season of 6.
Yeah, was it meant to be so brief, or were there plans to?
I think that's the way they made them then.
Yeah.
I think if we were making now, it would go into many, many more.
For sure.
Because they were liked very much. And they had such good writers, you see.
Oh yeah, and so many people from Sherlock Holmes worked on that series as well.
Oh, I know. And Edith Wharton.
Yeah.
Edith Wharton was the first time anybody had used Edith Wharton in England. Anyway, What a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
And you have a lovely voice, by the way.
Thank you for saying so. Well, we are here to talk about Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
So, had you known Jeremy prior to this?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I was thinking at that time of making a series about Anthony Eden, and who was a famous British politician. And he was a very good-looking man, and we sifted about with lots of names. And I had Jeremy's name down for that. But as soon as I heard they were casting Sherlock Holmes, I just knew that there was nobody else.
Yeah.
For me, there never was anybody else, no.
Right.
Dennis Foreman, who was one of the big guys at Granada, had always wanted to film the entire canon of Sherlock Holmes. And I had just completed a series called Crib, which sold worldwide and gave him the money to do so. They didn't have the money, but they did once they had Crib.
Mm-hmm.
And having a lift back from the studios in Michael Cox's car with possible director Mike Newell, we discussed who might play Sherlock Holmes. Well, for me, it was only one person. It was a no-brainer. Jeremy Brett. And Mike Newell enthusiastically agreed. Next thing I knew, he was cast, which was nice.
What was it that you sensed in him that you knew he could play Sherlock?
Well, it's just the look of him for a start, and the voice. That wonderful, wonderful voice.
Yeah.
He had height, he had bearing, he had everything that you would need for that part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, after those very first 13 episodes, how were you approached about taking over as producer? I mean, was it your choice to take on the show, or was it more like an assignment given?
No, David Plowright wanted me to do it.
Okay.
And at first I did think about it a lot. I thought, I think perhaps it should be a male producer, maybe.
Why would you say that?
Oh, well, it's such a, for me, I mean, such a real show written, I suppose, originally for boys and men. I don't know.
Sure.
Anyway, I agreed to do it, and I certainly was glad to, because once we got started, I enjoyed it enormously.
That's great.
We had a meeting for the second lot, with the ones that I said, okay, I'll do them, in which, of course, Ted Hardwicke was going to replace David, which was just as well, because for me, Ted had the personality, the tremendous warmth. And the two of them, they were just, they were wonderful together. And they enjoyed talking and being with each other.
Yeah.
And so I was glad that actually my taking over included having Ted Hardwicke. I really loved Ted.
Yeah.
And, whenever Jeremy was on a bad day, Ted would somehow manage to make it okay.
Yeah.
He's a very special person, Ted Hardwicke.
To be sure.
And anyway, so we had this meeting, and I said, yes, I'm delighted to take over the series, and I'm delighted to take Edward Hardwicke as Watson.
Wonderful.
I only met David Burke for about 5 minutes. He seemed a very nice man to me, but he was very excited about going off for his various Shakespeares.
Yeah. Well, once you did take over the reins, I mean, was it a very smooth transition? How did the crew respond?
Oh, yes, very, very easy.
Yeah.
There were no problems. I never had a problem with Jeremy other than his eldest. Never. No.
Sure.
And we used to tell stories of, theatre stories and things when we were waiting for trains and God knows what. No, there were no difficulties of any kind.
That's great. Well, I mean, were there aspects that you kind of observed that you wanted to retool a little bit? Are there changes you wanted to implement? Do you remember things like that?
Well, I suppose we did that with the writers.
Yeah.
We'd take over a story. Sometimes they were a little, what's the word? Not old-fashioned, but they needed just a little bit of, a little bit of tweeting. That's the word. I think they all ended up true to Conan Doyle. At least Conan Doyle's daughter was very happy about it.
Right.
Very happy indeed. She enjoyed coming always to see we invited her always to see the finished production,
Yeah, that's great, yeah.
Was that enjoyable or was that stressful for you to have her there?
Well, at the beginning, she was quite formidable. She always had a very imposing gentleman with her wearing a bowler hat, standing very straight. I think he was probably a colonel or something like that in the army. And I used to think, God, what are you going to think of all of this? But anyway, both of them always enjoyed it, and she was very, very charming to me.
Well, how would you say your approach as a producer differed from that of Michael Cox? And did you guys ever kind of lock horns behind the scenes?
Never.
How did you find Michael Cox?
No, I had no problems at all with him, other than the problems between him and Jeremy.
Right.
Michael Cox had done some kind of a favor. It was a setup for a new program, not Sherlock Holmes, of course, in France, between France and Granada. I don't know what it was, but they asked him following that, is there anything he'd like to do? Well, during his absence, we had become very successful.
You're right.
And he said, well, I'd like to do 6 more episodes of Sherlock. So David Plowright agreed to this as long as I directed one of them. He actually said, Michael, you can do 6 as long as June directs one. Michael agreed to do this, and he gave it to June Hansen. Fox indeed. Anyway, I couldn't have cared less whether I directed one of them or not, but I was utterly surprised that he would give it to June Hansen, who was not the sort of person. I mean, God love her, she's an awfully nice woman. She really is, but she and Jeremy would have their moments. He would just say, you're a silly woman. And thank God he never said that to me.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
So that was a silly thing of Michael Cox to do. Silly.
Yeah. But in the later years, I mean, surely you were producing, you could have potentially directed. Is there any reason why you didn't pick up the director reins later?
Oh, listen. Because I had to deal with the illness. You see, when you're directing, you actually cut yourself off from doing anything but the actual product.
Yeah.
And sometimes a script would turn up and I'd think, oh, yeah, I'd like to do that. And I'd think, no. Because you see, what I would have to do, I'd have to nanny Jeremy.
Yeah.
I really would be a nanny, more than a producer even.
Right.
As a producer, I chose, obviously, which stories we would turn into scripts and all of that.
Yeah.
So I was very, very close to them and to the writers, etc., and so forth. But
well, to us, it would have been a gem had you been able to direct one. So we kind of regret that you didn't, but that's okay.
That's very sweet of you. Very sweet of you.
And if my count is correct, you produced 22 installments of Sherlock Holmes. And honestly, I mean, we're not going to dig too deeply into each individual one, but I thought maybe we could touch on a few, because I think the first one that was shot with you on board as producer was The Second Stain. I don't think it was the first aired, but it's one of the few episodes that we're aware of anyway that actually contains a quite sizable deleted scene. I don't know if you remember this, but there was a moment at the beginning originally where Holmes and Watson are keeping bees in Sussex.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but that sequence was cut, and no one's ever seen it. Do you recall that and or why it was cut?
I think it was decided that because he was going to end up keeping bees, as we originally thought everything would be, that we would leave the bee thing until it actually happened, and we wouldn't confuse. I think Jeremy Paul wrote it. I think that's what he didn't want to do. I think he didn't want to confuse.
Well, we're going to jump around a little bit because there's just so many episodes.
Of course.
But I would like to talk about some of the directors that you brought onto the series. Obviously, one that always sparks conversation is Peter Hammond.
Oh, God, Peter, yeah.
Well, how did you become acquainted with Peter Hammond, and what made him such a good match for the series?
Well, I knew him from his appearances. He used to be a stage actor, and I'd seen him. We got off on the right foot, and he had a tremendous sense of humor. He made me laugh a very great deal. I was terribly sad when he died. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was also brought on to do the Sign of Four film, and
oh yeah,
we've heard interesting stories from different cast and crew members that he kind of had he developed a bit of a reputation for his use of mirrors and reflections.
That's right. Always, yes. I can tell you a great deal of why that happened. Many times we didn't have the money to actually create a set, so he could do this with mirrors. And he was very clever about doing that. He would do it so that you see, for example, instead of the hotel that we were supposed to be going into, what you would see is the hotel's name reflected on the pavement. And so we didn't actually have anything at all. So people just imagined that the hotel was there.
Right.
He was very good at that, very good indeed.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We did hear some stories that he was actually kind of asked to maybe reel things in a little bit for the Sign of Four and, go a little bit more standard and a little less avant-garde. Is there any truth to that he was nudged in a certain direction from time to time?
No.
Nothing like that?
I don't recall anything like that at all.
Okay.
We had a super cast, all of whom liked him enormously, and he liked them. John Ford.
Oh, yeah.
He suffered a lot of pain in the actual filming, and he never complained. Never. He was so good in it.
He was amazing. Yeah. Well, I mean, and there's so many. I mean, in that first batch that you did, there's so many classic episodes. Someday we'll talk about all of them, but I want to at least ask you about the Devil's Foot because it's an important episode in the series for many reasons. Not the least of which is that this was an unsolicited script from a young writer named Gary Hopkins, which,
yeah.
I mean, was that a common thing for you in those days to entertain?
No. It never happened.
Yeah.
It just, it was rare. It would just normally be looked at by somebody and shoved somewhere, I don't know. It certainly wouldn't have been put under my eye. But somehow or another, this was shoved under my eye, and I took it home and I read it, and I thought, God, this is bloody good. Right, we'll do it. And that's what we did.
Amazing. Did that ever happen again? Were there any other unsolicited? No?
No. That's a one-off, yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
I've never heard of anybody who has had his work accepted as quickly as I accepted. Gary, because it was splendid. I mean, there was nothing you could say that was wrong with it that wanted doing. So I said, yeah, we'll do this one straight off. And a lovely chap.
Yeah.
Speaking of things that rarely ever happened, was it a shock when Jeremy showed up with a new haircut?
You never know. Never knew what Jeremy was going to show up with at all, ever.
Yeah.
If Jeremy had turned up naked, it wouldn't have surprised us at all. No, you just looked at it and you thought, oh, God, how are we going to deal with this now?
Yeah.
And we just had somehow or another dealt with it, and that's the way it was.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes.
Oh, yeah. kept us on our toes okay.
Yeah.
I look at my toes now, they're virtually all broken.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Good old Jeremy.
Yeah.
Oh, God love him. God love him. He was like a child in so many ways.
Yeah. Well, we've heard a lot of stories about Jeremy, you know, everything from him dancing on tables at, you know, rap parties and
Oh, always. Well, you see, he went to Eton, a very famous, I'm sure you know, school.
Yeah.
And they were always, from the moment they were new boys, they were shoved on the table and made to sing and dance after the meal had been had.
Yeah.
And if you didn't do it, I dread to think what they did to you, because they were awful, cruel bullies.
Yeah.
But immediately, not always, but when we'd all been, the crew had been out and we'd had a meal, all of us together, he would always get up on the table and have a song and a dance, always.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I can't remember, I think it might have been in Obituary Piece, but Dennis Quilley, who was in that episode, The Devil's Foot.
That's right.
The two of them apparently got on smashingly and
Oh, they just sang songs all the time.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, and The Devil's Foot was shot in Cornwall, and I mean, what incredible locations. I understand you were the one who pushed for that.
I was. It was difficult at first. I've forgotten. Can you tell me the name of the director?
Ken Hannum.
That's right. I had difficulty with him at the beginning because we'd gone to Cornwall, and yet he was shooting everything internally.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to stop that, and I had to say, now look here, we've come to Cornwall for the views. We're going to have them. I'm paid for this. And we're going to have them, yeah. Nice man, Ken Hannum, but,
Yeah.
you know, they come with different things in their mind, and thank God.
Thank God for the producer.
I'm very, very happy that I was able to see the very early rushes. I'm very happy I was able to see those.
Well, and Michael Grimes, I believe I read that Mike Grimes was from Cornwall. Is that right?
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I don't know. Wonderful man. I mean, Mike Grimes, if you had him on your production, you were bloody lucky, I can tell you.
Yeah. No, what an amazing talent. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many incredibly talented folks on the show over the years. I mean, we spoke to costume designer Esther Dean recently.
Oh, Esther Dean, a very, very special lady indeed. She was one of the most remarkable. If, you know, in the middle of nowhere, you needed some ancient pair of bloomers or God knows what, she could find them. And we had a marvelous, marvelous support from all the people that worked on the show. They were one of the best teams that one could ever wish for.
Yeah.
She in particular stands out because, you know, and another one that was just remarkable, she wasn't with us for long because she went on to do films, and that was Jane Robinson. She was absolutely marvelous, yeah.
Yeah. One of the most, I guess, salient aspects of The Devil's Foot was it was the episode in which Holmes decides to kick the drug habit.
Oh, yeah.
Which, you know, it's not really in the story, but there were obviously good reasons to do it. Can you talk a little bit about that decision? How did that come about?
Yes. I can tell you about that. There had been a very unfortunate thing that had happened while we were filming. Nothing to do with us at all, but it was in the paper, in the local paper. I can't give you all the truth about it, but somebody had killed himself through shooting these drugs. And it was a great thing. And I talked to the police about it. And the police said it would be very, very helpful to us if you could do anything about him getting rid of the drugs.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, of course. Of course we'll do that. I'm only too glad. And that's why that was in there. It was because of a local incident, somebody being killed, dying as a result of abuse.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And we went down together to the beach, and he buried them.
Right.
The only thing I thought afterwards, we were in such a rush to do this scene because it was out of schedule, and we had to get back, and it was to do with the light and one thing and another. I was very cross that I hadn't had them wrapped in a handkerchief. I was very cross that I'd had them put. I thought, you stupid idiot, to go into the sand like that, and some child could find it. So I was angry with myself about that. But thank God no child did find it, and there you go.
Yeah.
It is a very striking scene, though. I mean, it is a very
Yes.
just how shallow how he buries the needle. It's very shallow in the sand.
Yeah.
You're quite right. A child could have definitely walked over it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should have had them wrapped. But there you are. You've got to do something, and it's at a moment's notice. And I was glad we did it in the end, but sorry I hadn't thought about a handkerchief or something. There you go.
Yeah. Well, it's understandable. But was that changed regarding the drug use? Was that something you guys had to discuss with Dame Jean Conan Doyle or anybody in the family, or did you guys just decide to go ahead and do it?
We did it. We had to do it.
Yeah.
Or not. It was of the moment.
Right. Of course. Well, and in his book, Michael Cox mentioned that there was some amount of miscommunication regarding planning and budgeting for both Silver Blaze and the Devil's Foot, and that the spending went over on both of them, which is why Hound of the Baskervilles ended up having to be thinned out a bit. Do you remember things about that? Was that the case?
I think it probably was.
Yeah.
We were very careful about budgeting, but things, as you know, can get out of hand. And if at the end of the series, which Hound of the Baskervilles was going to be, we suddenly were short of money, well, bloody hell, they should have given us some more.
Yeah. Did you ever have to have that conversation? Did you ever try to go back to Granada and ask for more money, or was it...
Oh, I was asking for more money constantly.
Yeah.
Not for myself, you understand.
Sure.
No, only for the show.
Did they ever capitulate? Did they ever give you more?
Very rarely.
Yeah.
I can't remember which particular case, but I said either we do it or we don't.
Yeah.
There we are. They gave it then.
Yeah. So right around this time, the stage play, The Secret of Sherlock Holmes, began running at the Wyndham Theatre. Were you involved in that at all, or was that entirely separate?
No, I was going to direct that.
Really?
Yeah, but there was a reason. I can't quite remember what it was. I know I had something that I had already committed to, and so in the end, I didn't do it. I thought it worked very well.
Yeah. Sebastian Stride.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'll remember this, but he was actually cast as Watson in the very first initial performance of The Secret of Sherlock Holmes that they kind of revealed to just the cast and crew and close friends, because Edward Hardwicke had a conflict. So Sebastian Stride was his understudy, and he was the very first Watson in the play, but only for that single performance. But then he was brought on to play Cadogan West in the Bruce Partington plans. And I was curious if this was at your insistence, or did Jeremy like him and bring him on? Do you remember that?
He was a very, very close friend of Jeremy's, and Jeremy wanted him in various productions. And the Bruce Partington, I'd be very careful the way I say this, but
sure,
it was the only show he could do least harm in.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
You got me?
Yeah, and well done in placing him there.
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting. And well, just because we're talking about actors, Colin Jevons is one who, we all love so much.
Oh, yes. He's so good. Yes, he's so good.
Yeah. And I know, he was, the character of Lestrade was meant to be in Bruce Partington plans, but I guess there was a conflict and Colin Jevons couldn't do it. But what was that like, having to, because obviously you couldn't keep someone like him on contract?
No, unfortunately, no.
Was that a nightmare, always having to try and get Colin back?
I always, wherever I could, always would have Colin because, he's terrific. But there were times when either he had to do something else or we had to do something else or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, I just think he was tremendously good. I always admired him. Always.
Yeah, very nice guy. Well, I feel like we have to touch at least briefly on Hound of the Baskervilles. It's such a famous story. And it made for a great episode, but I know that Jeremy was less than pleased with it in later years. What do you recall about the filming of Hound?
Well, Jeremy wasn't well for a start.
Yeah.
That was difficult.
How did you decide on Brian Mills as the director for that?
Oh, Brian Mills I'd used before in lots of other things. He could be very good, or he could be pretty awful, but he did his best with that. It's a great shame that we had to cut back on so many things for that. But this is what happens, you know. We did need more money. And that was it.
Yeah.
One always had a feeling of frustration about it and just hoped to get it finished. That was the main thing, to be able to get it finished and to hope to God it was going to be all right, you know. Granada gave with one hand and took back with the other.
Mm.
Instead of being hugely grateful that they had a very, very successful show on their hands, I don't know why. I don't know whether it was because other shows needed the money or what. I don't know. But I always thought, hell, my crib gave them the money to make Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Why can't they now repay it by giving me a little bit more for my budget?
Right.
But there you are.
Yeah.
Well, and we spoke very briefly to Trevor Bowen some time ago, the writer.
I love Trevor. Trevor. Yeah.
Well, and he expressed to us that he was actually a little bit sad that John Madden was not approached to direct this one, because he thought John Madden would. They got on very well apparently during the Priory School.
Oh, my dear, John Madden by now could take what he wanted, and he had quite definitely didn't want to do any more Sherlock Holmes. You know, I knew Trevor from when Trevor was an actor, and before he got to writing. And indeed, it would have been wonderful if John Madden had been able to do it, and if we'd had more money, and if, it's that famous thing.
Right.
But we didn't, and we just had to make do. And there we go.
Well, and after Hound was the casebook series, when Michael Cox returned to produce a series of 6.
Yeah.
But that was followed by your return, and a return to the 2-hour format. What was the thinking behind the change in format?
Yeah, well, first of all, I had started from the beginning. I said, if I'm going to do Sherlock, we are going to be on film all the time, because we don't want studio reproduction. We must have film. And they agreed to that. And so everything was on film anyway. And then along came the Master Blackmailer story, which is a brilliant story, and certainly is much more content than you would have for an hour. And especially with commercial breaks and all that, you know.
Right.
Well, speaking of longer stories, why was it that A Study in Scarlet was never filmed or adapted?
I don't know why The Study in Scarlet wasn't. I really don't know. It was the first story ever written about Sherlock. Yeah. So why? I don't know.
Interesting. Well, it's also interesting because we've heard some rumors that there was a time when Granada was actually considering the filming of some Holmes pastiche stories, some non-Doyle tales.
Yeah.
You know, in the event that they finished the canon. Can you shed any light on that?
There were rumors, you're quite right, of non-Doyle stories that was being considered by Michael Cox, but they never got through. I mean, you wouldn't dare, would you? Really, you wouldn't. And, you know, once you have the master, you can only be the slave and do what the master wants.
Right.
Did you have any difficulties filming on Baker Street after Granada opened it up as a theme park for tourists?
Well, that was an idea to get in money, you see. And they were very successful. They did get a lot of money. And it was a bit awkward at times when you had meetings on the doorstep of Baker Street or one of those things, and you had all your urchins running around. It wasn't good at all if any of the people that had paid money at the door to see the set suddenly appeared on it with them.
Right.
That was really awful. But no, nothing to upset us.
Yeah. So there was a moment that you shared with Jeremy at the Midland Stables that you mentioned to us in a very nice letter not too long ago. I thought perhaps you could share that story with us here if you're willing.
Of course, of course. After I took over the series, Michael Cox wanted to come back. Well, we all knew at Granada, and particularly David, that there were difficulties between Jeremy and Michael. And Jeremy became very unhappy and decided to run away. I saw him as I was leaving the Midland Hotel to go to the studios, and he had a canvas bag with some clothes that he just stuffed in, and oh dear, he was in an awful state. He was very upset and told me he couldn't go on with the fox, as he called him. And he was looking for a taxi, take him to the station. Well, I knew that the Midlands stabled horses, and Jeremy loved horses. Oh, so much. So I said, listen, go for a walk and find some horses. And he agreed. And that's what we did. And we had a nice little talk while we went. And so I dissuaded him from running away. And I said, it'll soon be over. And you and I will be back together again. And he gave me a big kiss and said, you promise? I said, I'll do my utmost to promise you, yes. And that is what we did. And there were ups and downs for them, I know.
Yeah.
But anyway, he got through that. These things happen.
For sure. And it's wonderful that you were there to be a friend to him in that moment. We've heard so many stories about Jeremy over the years.
Yes, I'm sure you have. Yeah.
And as you've mentioned, as things went later and later into the series, his health did begin to decline. When did you first start to have concerns about that? I mean, how did it affect the show when it began to happen?
I started by him constantly saying, you've got to come and see my flat. You've got to see what I've got in my flat. And I went over to Clapham, to his flat. It was in a bad state of disorder. He insisted I stay for lunch. He looked very gaunt. He wore no shoes. He spent a lot of time in the kitchen preparing the meal, which when I sat down at the table, turned out to be one frozen pea. He didn't change his clothes, and he was literally wearing rags. He was, walking around literally in a nightshirt. He looked terrible. And I said, well, this is the time. We have to have him hospitalized. And Cox, at that time being an executive producer, said, oh, no, we don't need the white coats yet. But the fact is we did need them. And eventually, after several unfortunate things, Plowright listened to me and said, you're quite right, he's got to have treatment. Jay was hospitalized. He was in a ward with 6 others, and they all looked the same. They had beards and all done up like Jesus, Oh, God.
Yeah.
And he remained there for treatment for schizophrenia for about 6 weeks. And I went to fetch him. And we went back to being Jeremy, really. And we began a new series. And it was essential. He took the various medicaments. If he missed one tablet, it was disaster. He was very good about taking them at first, but it didn't last. Jeremy Paul devised a script in which Charlie Gray, I should say, not Charlotte, as Bancroft virtually took over as Holmes's brother, and we shot that whilst Jeremy recovered. But it was only temporary, and we just had to finish the series. I mean, he was very, very ill indeed. Jeremy, he was a deeply hurt soul. I remember so many things. We all lived at the Midland Hotel while we were making the series, and they have a lot of cabinets in the hall there. They showed off jewelry. Well, he saw a ring in this blooming box, and he said, we've got to get married. And I said, no. I said, we really don't have time to get married, darling. I said, he said, we'll get engaged. You just wear the ring. I said, yeah, I'll wear the ring. But that went on. But it was becoming more and more frightening. It was soul destroying, really. He was a joy. He really was. Who could suddenly change to a dark personality, and unrecognizable.
Yeah.
I shall always love him. He's a very special person to me, and I'm on the edge of having a cry, so I'll shut up now. There you go. And then, of course, we had it's hard enough to make one of these things, but when you've got the added trouble is Jeremy all right? Can he do it? Is he talking to anyone? All of this. I remember, I quote this because I spoke to a friend of mine, a very nice actress, Patricia Hodge, about him because she was in
The Second Stain, yeah.
Yeah. She gave me a lift once over to his place because we had to go to somewhere else. And I said I would have to call in and see him. And she said, oh, all right. When they were working, he went up to her, and this was, must have been a good 2 years later. He said, oh, you saw me the day I flew away. And I always remember the pair of our faces the day I flew away. There's something very sweet about it and very terribly sad.
But what did he mean by that exactly?
That particular day, he gave in to his illness. He literally gave in to it. He was taken away. They were difficult times, darling, very difficult.
Well, and you somehow managed to make it all work, which is, I mean, it's just a miracle. I don't know how you did it.
Well, Charles Gray was an enormous help. He really was.
Yeah.
We just had changes every day. Just every minute of every day we had changes. It was an extraordinary show because it was terribly successful. And then finally it sort of spluttered out, and it was sad to see that.
Yeah. Was there ever any talk of trying to continue the show without Jeremy?
Yes, there was a thought. And I said, well, of course, there have been many Sherlock Holmes and there'll be many more.
Yeah.
And I certainly wouldn't wish to do them, but if there's somebody around that is good, I'm sure you'll find them, but not me. Won't be anything to do with me. So whatever talks went on about that, I sadly can't tell you.
That's okay, yeah. Do you recall when the last time you spoke to Jeremy was?
It was always in great convulsive embraces and loves, and I think we were sitting, the last time I remember, on Crewe Station. He was perfectly normal at that occasion, but that was the end. We parted to go on separate trains, and we didn't see each other again.
Yeah.
So he was completely gone now.
That's so hard.
I know.
A recording of him, a message he left for us saying goodbye and how much he loved us.
Oh, dear me, yes, I'd forgotten this. I'm just being reminded. This was a couple of nights before Jeremy died. He rang us up, and he'd obviously rung us up to say goodbye.
Oh, no.
And somewhere, I don't know where it is, but I've got that recording.
Yeah.
When was the decision made that the show should end, and how was that kind of disseminated to the crew, and was there pushback?
Well, dear, what happened was simple. He couldn't do any more. And although almost the final story was so helped by Charles Gray as the brother and giving him the dialogue that Jeremy should have had, it worked and kind of worked. And there was no question that he could ever film again.
Yeah.
He was completely gone, my dear.
Yeah.
Completely gone. I'm sorry.
No, I kind of wondered if it was a relief in some way.
For me, it was an enormous relief.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't let him down by going off and doing another show and say, let somebody else have this to deal with because I've had enough now. No. I was glad and I was not glad, and I was a whole mixture of things. But yes, at that point, I was glad not to do the show anymore.
Yeah. If you had to choose, I mean, do you have a very favorite memory from your time on the show? Any particular moment that just stands out as the very best of times?
I think probably when he was so happy when the festival gardens for Baker Street and everything was opened officially to the program. And he wore Sherlock clothes and Edward wore Watson clothes, and they both walked round together. And they said, come over and be with us. And they took me into the middle of them, and they said, it's just the three of us. And Jeremy said, yes, it's just the three of us. I think that was a lovely thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
How are your just overall memories of the series? Do you look back on specific episodes? Do you rewatch the show?
Oh, most certainly. I would always rewatch The Master Blackmailer. That is an incredible piece. There's so much in that.
Yeah.
Hardy was superbly wicked and got his terrible comeuppance from Norma West, who did him in right royally at the end.
Absolutely.
I love that one. I love that.
What an amazing villain. He's one of the greatest villains of all time, in my opinion. He's wonderful.
You get a villain, you get him. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, next year will be the 40th anniversary since the beginning of the series.
Will it?
Yeah.
Gosh.
How does it feel for you all these years later to be talking about the show and to have such a legacy?
Well, I just feel I was very lucky. It was Trojan work, but I was very, very lucky to have it. And there were times when, like Jeremy, I could have run away too, but I didn't pack my bag. Simply say that.
Yeah.
As far as 40 years are concerned, my God. But then remember, I can't believe I'm 94, you see. Incidentally, I want to say now that I have enjoyed enormously talking to the three of you.
Oh.
It has been very, very nice. I mean, we don't know each other really, but we do.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say how very happy I am that we've had the opportunity to speak.
Well, June, I don't know how we could ever thank you enough for spending some time with us tonight, but on behalf of your fans everywhere, I hope that you will accept our warmest thanks for speaking with us here. This has just been absolutely wonderful.
I certainly do. And I'm sure we'll speak again. Ta-ta. Ta-ta.